Welcome to Chapter 2. In this chapter we'll be going over JavaScript and the JavaScript library JQuery. In this video we'll basically be going over the fundamentals and the basics of JavaScript. So let's talk about exactly what JavaScript is. And it was originally called ECMA script and was created by Netscape, the same company that created the Netscape Navigator browser. JavaScript is basically the scripting language of the web, the client-side scripting language. It runs on the user's computer or the client as opposed to languages like PHP, which run on the server. It's used for a lot of different things. We'll go over that in a minute. JavaScript has nothing to do with the Java programming language. Aside from the name, it has absolutely nothing to do with it. So, some uses of JavaScript. There's a ton of things that JavaScript is used for, but here is some of the more common functions. We have HTML form validation to validate fields, to make sure that required fields have some content in them, validating email addresses, numbers, ranges, all kinds of things. Event handling. If you want to, say, have something pop up when you click on a link, you would use JavaScript or libraries such as jQuery to do something like that. Or if you want, say, if you want an image to change when you hover over it, things like that. Dynamic elements on the page. It deals with the DOM, or the document object model, which refers to basically anything on not just on a website but in the browser. It powers HTML5 features, features like geolocation, web storage. They're all called they're HTML5 features, but JavaScript is what does the decision making and pretty much just is the powerhouse of those elements and features. Search and form autocomplete. We've seen this with search engines like Google. When you start to type, it'll kind of give you some suggestions. That's all done with JavaScript or some JavaScript library. Animations, if you want to make things move on a website or change shape, things like that. jQuery, Ajax, and MooTools. There's a whole bunch of libraries that are all written in JavaScript that can do just some awesome things on the web. So adding JavaScript to an HTML page is fairly easy. You can see we have a basic HTML structure. We have our HTML head, body tags, and you can see that within the head tags we have these script tags, and this is where we would put our inline JavaScript. So by inline I mean that we're putting it right in the HTML page as opposed to in a JavaScript file. So we can do that as long as we have our opening and close script tags and we include all the JavaScript in the middle. We have another way of including JavaScript, and that's through an external JavaScript file, and we do that with the same thing, the script tags. This type equals text JavaScript, it's good practice to have this. Even it should actually be up here as well. It's not needed, it's not going to break anything if you don't have it, but it is good practice. And then we have the src attribute, the source attribute, much like an image file, which points to the JavaScript document, which it has a .js extension. So variables, if you have any experience in any programming language, then you probably know what variables are. They're basically a placeholder for pretty much anything: text, integers, objects. And like any other programming languages, JavaScript variables do have some rules that they have to follow. For instance, variables should always start with a letter, preferably a lowercase letter, although you could use uppercase. They are case sensitive, so this x equals 4, capital X equals 4 is not the same as lowercase x equals 4. To declare a variable, we can use the var keyword. We can say var x. which will make x a variable, but we don't need to have this var. We can do it just like this if we want. We can just say x equals 4. So essentially these two are both declaring x a variable. This one isn't giving it a value, it's just declaring it. These two here, I should actually make this a lowercase. These two here are the exact same. The last two, they're doing the same thing. They're creating a variable called x that holds the value of 4. So it doesn't matter if they have the var or not. So arrays, most programming languages also use arrays, which are basically just a variable that holds more than one value. And in JavaScript there's a few different ways we can declare and add values to an array. In this example we're saying var cars, which is we're declaring a variable called cars, and we're saying equals new array. So we're saying that this variable is an array. Up to this point, this first line, it is an empty array. There's nothing in it, but it is in fact an array. Now below we can actually add values to each, I guess, pocket you could call in the array. So we can say cars brackets 0 equals Honda. Arrays always start with 0. It's a very important thing to remember. The second value is Toyota and the third is Ford. Now this here, we can do the same exact thing in this format. We're saying variable cars, so cars is a variable that holds an array, and here we're actually including the values in the array declaration. Okay, so this is Honda, Toyota, Ford. It's the same exact thing as this. We could access, if we write it this way, we can still access Honda with cars 0. It's the same exact thing. So loops are used to run the same code over and over until a certain condition is met. And there's a couple different kinds of loops. In JavaScript we have the for loop, the while loop, and the for in loop, which is used usually for arrays. We also have the do while loop, but it's not used too much. I don't think I've actually ever used it, but that's something that you can look up if you want. And essentially loops all do the same thing, but there's usually a bit of a difference when choosing which loop to use. For instance, the for loop is usually used when you know the exact number of times that it's going to run, while the while loop is usually used when you don't know the number of times. And the for in loop, like I said, is usually used with array objects. So here we have a bit of loop syntax and the for loop. So basically we're going to say for and then open some parentheses, and we have three parameters, I guess. The first one, and they're separated by semicolons. So the first one says variable I equals 0. So we're saying that there's a variable I with the value of 0. And the next condition, so this is just pretty much declaration. The next parameter is the condition. So we're saying as long as I is less than 5, it'll do what's in between the parentheses. Now this last part, this I++, that's just an increment. That's saying that we want to increase I by 1 each time around. Okay, so at the beginning of the loop, I is going to equal 0. We're going to do what's in between the curly braces, which in this case is print out the text number, and then the I, which is the variable, and then a line break. So it's going to do that every time until I is not less than 5. Alright, so what this would do if we ran it, it would print out number 1, number 2, all the way to number 4. It wouldn't actually print out number 5 because we're saying if I is less than 5. If we do want it to do 1 through 5, then we can say I is less than or equal to 5. I hope that makes sense. The while loop, we're actually doing the same exact thing here, just using the while loop. So we want to declare the variable just like we declare any variable, and then we want to say while, and then in the parentheses we want to put the condition, which is if I is less than 5, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to write out number 1 through 4 because we don't have the equal sign here. If we want 1 through 5, we can say if I is less than or equal to 5. And then finally we're incrementing much like we did up here, just in a different way. And this is it's easier to show you than to try to explain it, so we will be doing this in this section. I'm sorry, not in this section, in this chapter, so you can actually see how it works. JavaScript functions. So functions are pretty easy to understand. They're basically just predefined bits of code, and we can create a function by using the word function and then the name that we want to give it, and then we want some parentheses, and if we want, we can have parameters inside the parentheses. This is a very simple example. There's no parameters. We're just saying we want this function that's called some function to write out this is some function. Document.write it's a command that will just print it out to the screen. So that's all this function would do. And this here, we're creating the function here, but it's not going to actually do anything until we run it. And to run it, all we need to do is type out the name of the function and the parentheses. So this would actually print out the text that's here. Okay, objects. In JavaScript, pretty much everything is considered an object. A string, numbers, dates, arrays are all considered objects. And objects have properties and methods. Properties are basically characteristics, and we can define properties with dot syntax. So we want to say the object and then dot and then the property name. Okay, so here's an example. We're using a variable which is a string, hello, and this is an object. This variable greeting is an object. Now here we're saying variable x, we're creating a new variable which is equal to greetings length. Now length is a property of the greeting variable, okay, which holds the text hello. So what this length property is the number of characters of the variable or of the text hello, which is 5. So here x is equal to 5. It's equal to the length property of the greeting variable or object. So I hope that wasn't too much. We'll be going over pretty much everything that I just talked about in our project, so you'll get a better understanding of this. So that's it for this PowerPoint. Next we'll be looking at jQuery. Alright guys, so we went over JavaScript. Now I want to go over jQuery, which is still JavaScript. It's just a clump of JavaScript, which is called a library. There's quite a few different JavaScript libraries. Ajax is another one, MooTools. There's a bunch of them out there, but jQuery is, I'd say, by far the most popular. So what is jQuery? As I just said, jQuery is a multi-browser JavaScript library. So jQuery can be used in IE, Chrome, Firefox, all the browsers, all the major modern browsers. And it's basically nothing more than a bunch of JavaScript code. It's actually just one file. If you want to use jQuery, you have to include the file. And if you look at the jQuery file, it's usually just a bunch of meshed up code that is impossible to read, the compressed version at least. You can also get the version where there's comments and kind of explains what things do, but if you want speed, then you'd probably use the compressed version. jQuery makes it easy to navigate a document and select DOM elements. Now DOM stands for Document Object Model, and all the elements in a website and browser are DOM elements. The body tag, an H1 tag, the browser window itself, everything. So jQuery allows you to maneuver around the DOM and manipulate certain elements. It handles events effectively, so clicking, hovering, mouse up, mouse down, keyboard strokes, all kinds of events. We can easily do different things with jQuery events. You can use jQuery to create plugins on top of the JavaScript library as well. So what can we do with jQuery? Just like with JavaScript, there's a ton of things we can do. Some of the more popular functions that jQuery is used for are effects and animation. So you see now a lot of the websites nowadays have some kind of slider or slideshow or tab animation on their home page, maybe to showcase their new products or services, and a lot of times those are built with jQuery. jQuery is used to handle events, so clicks, toggles, hovers, mouse up and down, scrolling. We can do all different kinds of things with events. Feature detection, so if we want to, let's say, if we want to use the HTML5 geolocation feature, we can use jQuery to see if that browser can actually handle that or support that feature. And as I said, jQuery is used to manipulate the document object model. We can use jQuery along with Ajax and build Ajax applications, and there's just a ton of other stuff that you can do with jQuery. So to use jQuery, like I said, it's basically just one file, and you have to include that in your text, in your HTML file. So we would do that in the head tag of the HTML document. Now, what we would do, there's a couple things we can do. The first would be to go to jQuery.com, and I think it's .com or .org, and download the actual file, jQuery, and name it. You can name it anything you want. In this example, we're calling it jQuery.js. So that file has all the jQuery code in it, and we're putting that on our server and including it. Another way we can do this is to use what's called a CDN, and a CDN is a document or a library hosted by another service such as jQuery or Google, which is a very popular one. And this doesn't require us to download any code or put any code on our server. All we need to do is throw this script tag in there, which points to the library. So this is the quicker way of doing it. If you're using your local host and you're not actually on the internet, then I'd suggest using this, because sometimes this won't work. You can see all of Google's libraries at this link here at the developer site. There's jQuery, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can check out. Okay, so the document ready handler. Now, I'm just going to read this. When we include our external jQuery scripts, or we add jQuery to the head area, we need to first check if the document is ready. If we don't, then our jQuery code will run before the rest of the code in which we are trying to use or modify. And we can do this with the following syntax. So what this is saying is that we want our code, our jQuery, to run after the website or the document loads, because if it calls our jQuery code before any HTML, it's not, obviously that's not going to work. So this is what we do. We just use this the $, which is just jQuery. It stands for jQuery in general, and we're taking the document, and when it's ready, so this .ready, when it's ready, we want to run this function, and everything that we want to do goes in that function. Alright, so I hope that that's understandable. Selecting elements. One of the reasons jQuery is so powerful is that we can grab virtually anything in the DOM or on the website, the browser, whatever you want to call it, and we do this with selectors. And a selector is a jQuery or a $, and then some parentheses with whatever you want to grab in the middle. So this, for instance, will grab all div tags on the page. Alright, so if you want to zero in on a certain div, then you can give it an ID, and you can do it this way. So this here will actually select only the div with the ID of my div. And it's not just divs, you can get paragraphs. So this here would grab the paragraph with the class of my class. You can grab form elements, span tags, pretty much anything at all. And that's what makes this so powerful. When you're using plain JavaScript, it's not that easy to grab something with a class name. You can use the get element by ID to grab something with an ID, but if it doesn't have an ID, then it's a little more complicated in Java, just using plain JavaScript. jQuery makes it very easy to get whatever we want. Okay, so jQuery actions or methods or whatever you want to call them. Once we grab something with a selector, like we just saw, we can do things to it, such as call an action. I have a couple examples of actions here. The first one we have is the add class action, and all that does is add a class to whatever we're selecting. So in this example, we're taking all div tags and we're adding a class of my class. Okay, so this is going to do this to all div tags. This here, the CSS action, will let us add CSS style to an element. So we can just, on the fly, add CSS to an element. So we're grabbing something with an ID of my class, and we're just making the color red. We can get all of the HTML inside of an element using .html. So let's say here we're creating a variable called my_element, and I probably should have mentioned that you can create variables and arrays and all that just like we did in JavaScript when you're dealing with jQuery. So we're creating a variable which is equal to the element with the ID of my element, and the .html is going to actually give us all of everything that's in that ID, that's in that element. Okay, so whether it's a paragraph or images, a whole page, whatever it is, this is going to put all the HTML into this one variable, and then we can use that to do certain things. jQuery events. Like I said, jQuery is very good at handling different kinds of events, and here we can see an example. We're saying all the A tags. Okay, so we know that an A tag is a link, so we're saying all the links, when we click on it, when we click on a link, we're going to run this function, which there's nothing here because this is just an example, but we could do, let's say, like we just saw, the add class action. We could add a class to all the links when they're clicked, if we wanted to do that. Some other events include blur, focus, hover, key down, load, and if you want to go to the jQuery website, you can see all the events that we can deal with. Show hide elements is another great use of jQuery. We can use the hide and show action. So here we're grabbing something with the ID of my element, and we're going to hide it, and once it's hidden, it's going to do whatever we put here. Okay. Same thing here, we're just showing it. So do something once the element is shown. Here we're using toggle, which basically changes from hide to show as you click. So that's what toggle does. Animations. We can add animations to elements with jQuery. Here's an example. So we're saying the ID, the element with the ID of my element, we're going to say slide down. So that's going to make something slide down, and that takes a parameter, or a few parameters, the first being the speed. We can use a numeric value, or we can actually use these keywords, slow, fast, and then the next parameter is the actual function that we want to happen when the slide is finished. And here we have the same thing, except it's slide up, and we also have slide toggle. So that's it for this section. I understand that this is a lot of information crammed into one video and document, but it'll get easier as we go along and we actually use these techniques. So that's it for this section, and I'll see you in the next. Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about variables and arrays. Now, we talked about this in the first section in the PowerPoint, but we didn't actually get to do any kind of programming, so I'm hoping that this will give you a better understanding as to how variables and arrays work. So I'm going to create a new folder, and it's going to be called Chapter 2, Section 2. And I'm going to create just one file, and that's going to be an HTML file, and I'm just going to call that index.html. So let's open that with the browser. Obviously we're not going to get anything. We haven't wrote anything yet. And let's open it with Notepad++. Now I'm going to paste in an HTML shell. So we have our doc type, HTML tags, head and body tags, we have a title, so let's save that, make sure that that's showing. You can see our title's changed. Now we can start adding some JavaScript, and this is the first video where we're actually going to type some JavaScript. So if you remember from the PowerPoint, to do that we're going to open up some script tags, and what I'm going to do in this video, there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but I'm going to do all the logic in the head area, and then when we want to print out something, I'm going to do that in the body. So I'm also going to create script tags in the body. Now just because you type some JavaScript in here, you can still access, let's do it now. We'll create a variable. We'll say variable car is equal to Honda, and you can use double quotes or single quotes when you define a string. So we have this car which is equal to Honda. Now I want to print this out. I want to print out the variable car in the browser. To do that in JavaScript, we want to use the document.write function. Now what we can do here is we can use this function to print out anything. So let's say anything. Save that, and it's printing out the exact text we type in. But we don't have to just type in text. We can put a variable in here. So let's put our car variable in here, so we can have that printed out onto the screen. And you can see it printed out Honda. And if you remember in the PowerPoint, I told you that you don't need that var keyword. We can save that, and that's still going to type out Honda. Now we can change the variable as we go along, and it's always going to be the last declaration. So let's change this to Toyota, and if we save that, it's going to change to Toyota. Alright, so that's strings. Let's deal with some integers and do some simple arithmetic. So I'm going to say variable x is equal to 5. Now I'm not using quotes here because this is an integer. If we want an integer, which is a number, and we want to do arithmetic with it, then we don't want quotes, because if we have quotes, that makes it a string, and you can't do arithmetic with strings. So let's also create another variable called y, and that'll be equal to 10, the integer 10. So I want to do this, I want to add these two together. So in my document.write function, I'm going to say x plus y. So we're going to write out x plus y. Save that, reload, and we get 15. Now if we change these to strings, and we can do that by just adding quotes. Oh, sorry. So now we have the string, which is just the text 5, and the string, which is the text 10. We can save that, and still using x plus y, it's going to give us 510, because all it's doing is concatenating the y variable onto the end of the x variable. Now, if you've never heard the word concatenating or concatenation, It just basically means to tag them onto each other. So we can mix integers and strings, and I'm going to show you that right now. So in our document write, I'm going to create a string that says I have. Now I want to say I have 5 apples. Alright, so that's easy enough. It's just going to print that out. Now what if I want to use this variable here? I can't say I have X apples and expect it to turn into a 5. It's just going to say I have X apples. What we need to do is concatenate, and we can do that with a plus sign. So we have to end this string. We're going to have 2 strings with an integer in the middle. So the first string is going to be I have, and the second string will be apples. Now if we want to add this variable X into the middle, we have to use a plus sign and put X with 2 plus signs. So that's just concatenating it on. If I save this, it's going to say I have 5 apples. Now it's all crammed together. We actually need to put a space here. We can do that just by putting a space in the string areas of this statement. So that's how we would include a variable in a string. So that's pretty much the gist of variables. Pretty easy to understand. Now I want to talk about arrays. So just like in the PowerPoint, I'm going to create a variable called cars, which is going to be equal to a new array. Now at the moment, cars is just an empty array. We can add values right in the declaration by just adding comma separated values. So let's say Honda, comma, now we need quotes because these are strings. We'll say Toyota, and we'll say Ford. Alright, so now we have an array that has 3 values, and we can print out these values. Let's just get rid of this by using an index. So if we say cars 0 brackets with 0, save that, it echoes out Honda. Now the reason it echoes out Honda is that it's the first value in this array. Now you might think that we should be putting 1 here, but like I said in the PowerPoint, arrays always start with 0. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and so on. It's very important thing to understand is that they start with 0. Now we can also add to this array by saying cars, let's see, the next one would be 3, and we'll set that to Dodge. So now down here, if we say document.write cars 3, we get Dodge. Now I also want to mention that we don't need to use this syntax. We don't need to use the new array in parentheses. We could actually just use brackets and not even use the word array. So this will do the same thing. So if we save that and let's print out 0 again, our first value, we get Honda. Alright, let's see. I'm not going to go through for each loops, which are used to go through the array values, because we're going to do that in the loops video. Let's see. Oh, array properties. Now arrays can have methods and properties as well. For instance, the length property. Let's do this. Let's do document write cars dot length. Now remember, an array is an object, and objects can have properties. Now to access those properties, we use the dot syntax. So cars dot length. We're getting the length property of the cars object, which is an array. So let's do that, and we get 4 because we have these 3, and then we added an extra one here, so it gives us 4. Now we can also use the property index of. So let's say cars index of, and now we can put in a value, let's say Toyota, So what this is going to do is return the index number of the Toyota value. So let's save that, and we get 1 because this is 0, Toyota's 1. So that's pretty much all I can think of on the fundamentals and basics of arrays. Obviously we'll get more into this as the series goes on. So the next thing we'll be talking about is loops. Hey guys, in this section we're going to be talking about JavaScript loops, and a loop is basically just a block of code that will keep running over and over until a certain condition is met. Most programming languages have multiple types of loops. We're going to be going over for loops, while loops, and for in loops. So I'm going to create a new folder, and this is chapter 2 section 3. And again, I'm just going to create one file, and this is going to be index.html. So I can open that with in the browser. And I'm also going to open it in Notepad++. Now I'm going to just paste in some HTML. So we have our structure. We're going to do this in the body. We're going to add our script tags. Now I'm going to start with the for loop. So you may remember the syntax from the first section when we went over the PowerPoint. What we want to do is say for, put some curly braces. Now in the parentheses we want to have 3 parameters. The first, we want to declare a variable. So we'll say variable I is equal to 0, and we want to separate these with a semicolon. The next parameter is the condition. So let's say I, as long as I is less than 10. Alright, so that's the condition, and then we just want to increment, so we want to do I plus plus plus, which it'll just add 1 to the I each time around. So we're starting at 0, and the condition is as long as I is less than 10, and then we're incrementing each loop, each time it loops. Now here is where we specify what we actually want to happen each iteration. Each time a loop runs through its course is called an iteration. We'll say document.write, which is the function that writes out input to the screen, to the browser, and we'll say we'll have a string, and we'll call it number. And then what we want to do is concatenate the I, whatever the I is in that current iteration. And if you remember, we can concatenate with a plus sign, and we can throw in the I, which is a variable. And we want to put a space here so that we have a space after the word number. So let's save this, and let's run this. Okay, so we have number 0 through number 9. Now I want to put a line break so that we have our numbers on a separate line. So we can concatenate again, we'll say with the plus sign, and then we need quotes, and we'll put in an HTML BR tag. Save that and reload, and now we have it on each line. Now you may ask why it only goes to 9. That's because we're saying as long as I is less than 10. So that doesn't include 10. It's less than 10. What we need to do if we want the actual 10 is to say if I is less than or equal to 10. So if we save that and reload, then we get the 10. So that's a for loop. Now I'll show you how to do the exact same thing with a while loop. So let's get rid of this. Clear that out. Alright, so with a while loop, we don't claim the variable, we don't declare the variable inside of anything. We just declare it as we would any variable. So we'll say variable I equals 0, and now we use the while keyword with parentheses and curly braces. Now in the parentheses we only want one parameter, and that's the condition. So we'll say while I is less than 10. And then what we want to do is print out, just like we did, we'll say document.write, and what did we say? We said number space I plus br. Alright, now we don't have the increment yet. We need to do that after what we want to happen. So we're just going to say I plus plus. So this will do the exact same thing. Let's save it and reload, and you can see it goes up to 9. Again, we can add the equal sign if we want to go to 10. So this is the same exact thing. You're claiming the variable, you're stating the condition, you're doing what you want to do each iteration, and then you're incrementing I. Alright, so now I want to get into arrays and loops, and you can use any type of loop with an array in JavaScript, but the for in loop is often used. So what I'm going to do is create an array. Let's say var people, and that is going to equal, and we can do new array or we can just use brackets. So I'm just going to use the brackets, and we're going to say Sally, Bob, Steve, and Jen. Alright, so now we have an array. We have an array called people with 4 values. Now what I want to do is, instead of calling a single value like we could just do this people people 0. I'm sorry, we need to document right. And we went over this in the last section. We can easily print out an array value, but what I want to do is loop through and print out all the values on the screen. And like I said, we can do that with any kind of loop, but the for in loop is specifically created for arrays. So how we would do that is very easy. We're just going to say for, and we'll say x, we'll use I again. So we'll say I in people. We'll open some curly braces, and here we want to write out each iteration. We want to write out the name, okay, or the value. So we want to do document dot write, and we'll say people I. So we want that I because that's going to be replaced each iteration with a name or a value. So let's save that, and let's actually concatenate a line break. So we have these all on separate lines. So if we reload, now we get all the arrays printed out. And if we add to the array, let's say Tom, it automatically is going to be added to the loop. And like I said before, we don't have to use a for in loop with an array. We can just use a standard for loop or a while loop. So I'll show you how to do the same thing with a for loop. So we're going to say for parentheses, curly braces, and the first parameter again is going to be the declaration. I'm going to say I is equal to 0 and have a semicolon. And now instead of saying I is less than a certain number, we're going to say people dot length. Now remember we talked about objects and properties. The array people is an object, and since it's an object, it has properties, and one of the properties that's included in the core of JavaScript is length, and that can mean different things depending on the object. If this is a variable, just say a string, it's going to be the number of letters or characters in that string or in that variable. If it's an array, then length is going to give us the number of values in the array. Okay, so we're saying I equals 0 for as long as I is less than the length or the number of values, then we're going to run some code. But we also can't forget to add on the increment. So what we want to do is do the same thing. We want to print it out to the screen. So we'll say document.write, and let's see, we'll just print out people I, and we also want to add on a line break. Save that, and we have the same thing. Just to make sure, we'll take off Tom. Alright, so that's doing the same exact thing. And now I'll show you how to do this with a while loop. Let's just copy this because that's not going to change. So we'll say I equals 0, and we want to say while I is less than people.length. Then we want to say document.write people I. Now let's just concatenate a line break. Save that, and oh, you know what? Now what we're doing here, why this is happening, is our loop is just it's going to keep looping because we didn't increment. So I is always equal to 0. So this is just it's just going to keep looping. So we need to add that increment. So we'll stop that and reload. Let's just open it up again. Alright, so now we have our names. So like I said, it's really preference what loop you want to use in what situation. I myself tend to stick to for loops even when dealing with arrays, but like I said, it's all preference. So that's how you deal with arrays, loops and arrays in JavaScript. The next video will be talking about functions. Hey guys, in this section we're going to be talking about functions, and a function is just a block of code that you can run at any specific time. So I'm going to create a new folder, and this is chapter 2 section 4. I'm going to create my index file. And I'm going to open it in my browser and in Notepad++. And I'm just going to paste my HTML. Okay, so that's good. So when you're creating functions, you usually either want to create them in an external JavaScript or in the head of your document, because when you're creating a function or declaring a function, it's not outputting anything to the browser, so that should be done externally or in the head. So I'm going to put my script tags up here, and any output we have we'll put in the body. So to create a function, you just want to write the word function and then name it. So I'm going to create a function called say hello. Now you want to give it a name and then parentheses and then curly braces. And in here is what you want this function to do. So I'm going to make this very simple, and we're just going to write out document.write. We're going to write out hello. So that's what this function does. It prints out hello to the screen. Now if we save that and reload, we get nothing. That's because all we've done is created the function. We're not running it. To run it, all you have to do is write say hello with the parentheses. Now if we reload, it's saying hello. And this is a function in its simplest form. We can also add parameters to a function, and we put the parameters inside of the curly braces, and then we can use those parameters in our function's body. So for instance, I'm going to change the name of this, and I'm going to call this function sayIt. Now you might notice that the second word of the function I'm capitalizing. That's a common practice in JavaScript. It's called camel case. You begin the function name with a lowercase, and then each word after that will start with an uppercase. So that's very common practice. You could also use underscores like this, but in JavaScript I prefer the camel case. So I'm going to say sayIt, and then I'm going to give it a parameter, and that parameter is basically just a variable, and I'm going to call that word. Now instead of just printing out hello, I want to print out whatever this word is going to be. So I'm going to get rid of the hello string and put in the word variable. So now if we want to call this function, first of all, what it's going to do is print out whatever is typed in as a parameter. So we can say sayIt, and we can type a string or whatever, an integer, whatever we want in here. So I'll say this is my function. So if we save that and reload, that gets printed out onto the screen. And you can have as many parameters as you want. Let's give you an example of that. We'll say word1, and then we want to separate our parameters with a comma. We'll say word2. So we'll write out word1, and we want to concatenate a space. So we'll say plus, and we'll have a string which is a space, just a space, and then plus word2. So here we can input two different words. We'll say hello, and then again we want a comma to separate these, and world. So if we save this, this is going to print out hello world. Now what if we forget, or we just don't add the second parameter if the function has a second parameter? So let's get rid of this second word, save it and reload, and we get hello undefined. And that's because we have two parameters but we're only entering one. Now in some programming languages like PHP, we could have a default. We could say word1 equals world if that parameter is not inputted in the function. So if we save that and reload, that doesn't work in JavaScript, unfortunately. So we can still create a default. It's just a little bit trickier. So we can just say word2 equals word2. So we're saying the variable will equal whatever's here in word2, but if there's not, or then our default would be world. Okay, so let's add that semicolon and save that. Now if we reload, we get hello world. And now if we can still add a second parameter. Let's just say Brad. And if we save that and reload, then you can see that Brad overrides world because we put that in. So this is a good way not to mess up your code if the person for some reason forgets to put in a parameter, if you're a programmer, or if it's coming from a form or whatever. So that's a good way to provide a default. So I'll create a couple other functions just to give you a better hang of it. Let's create a function called add, and we want to put in, we'll say num1 and num2. So what we want this function to do is simply add num1 and num2. So we can say, actually we'll say sum equals num1 plus num2. Alright, and down here let's say add, let's say 5 and 5. So if we save that and reload, we get nothing. Now the reason we're getting nothing is we're not returning anything or printing anything out from this function. So what we need to do is return a value, and what we want to return is the sum. That's what we want displayed. So we need to say return sum, and if we save that and reload, we still get nothing. That's because just simply returning it isn't going to print it out. So we need to, if we're not going to use document.write up here, then we need to use it here. So we'll say document.write add 5 and 5. So now we get our 10. Now you notice we didn't use print quotes because these are integers. If these were strings, and let's just do that just to see what happens, and we reload, we get 55 because they're now strings, so they're simply just going to be tacked on to each other. They're not going to be actually added. So that's as far as I want to go in this section, because in the next section when we do events, we'll also be dealing with functions. We're going to look at how we can run a function by simply clicking a button or a link, or even just on the page load, have it run automatically. So that's it for this section. I will see you in the next. In this chapter we're going to be talking about conditional statements. So we're going to talk about if else, else if, and switch statements. And what they do is basically just check for a condition, and if that condition is met, then it'll do something, and if it's not, it can do something else. So every programming, well, just about every real programming language has some kind of conditional statements that you can use. That's what makes all the decisions. So I'm going to create a new folder called Chapter 2, Section 5. Put that right in there. And we're just going to need one file for this, and that's going to be an HTML file. Alright, so let's open that up in our browser as well as Notepad. And I'm just going to paste in my HTML. So let's start with something real simple. We'll start with just some basic algebra. So let's open up our script tags. And what I'm going to do is create a variable called x, and let's set that equal to 5. Now we can check for a few different things. We can check if x is equal to 5 or not equal to 5. We can check if x is greater than something or less than something. So what I'm going to do is say if, and an if statement is set up I guess like a function. You have if and then the parentheses, which take parameters, and then the curly braces, which what you want to put, where you want to type whatever you want it to do if a certain condition is true. So we're going to say if x, let's just say if x is equal to 5. Now this operator here, this double equals, this is a comparison. This is an assignment. So if you have one equal sign, you're assigning something to something. So in this case, we're assigning 5 to x, or x to 5. In this case, we're comparing it. We're saying, is x equal to 5? All right, so that's very important to differentiate these two symbols, okay, the double and single equal sign. So let's say if x is equal to 5, what we want to do here, I guess let's just alert. We'll alert, yes it is. Okay, so if we save this and let's open up let's reload this, we get an alert that says yes it is. So let's change the value of x. Let's change it to 4 and save. If we reload, it doesn't do anything. Alright, so we can set this up so that it does do something using an else statement. So we can say else, and then we want to open up some curly braces, and inside that we put what we want if it's not true. So let's say alert we'll say no it is not. Okay, so if we reload that, we get no it is not. And like I said, we can use different kinds of conditions here. We can say if x is greater than, or I'll say, yeah, if x is greater than 5. So we get no it's not, because x is equal to 4 and 4 is less than 5. So this is very simple algebra, really. If we change this to 6, we get yes it is. Now if we change this to 5, we get no it's not, and the reason for that is we're asking if it's lower than 5. If we want to ask if it's 5 or lower, then we can say is greater than or equal to 5, which will make it yes it is. Now what if we want to check multiple conditions? We can do that with what's called a logical operator, and we've used these actually in this chapter. We have and, or, not, and these have different symbols. So let me just go down here. If you want to check if something and something else is true, we would use and, which uses 2 ampersands. If we want to use or, we would use 2 pipes. If we want to use not, that's 1 pipe. Okay, so those are the different symbols we can use. So let's say if x is, we'll just say if x is greater than 5 and x is less than, let's say, 10. Alright, so we're using the and logical operator. We could also say or if x is greater than 5 or x is less than 10. So let's just see what we get here. Let's say 4. Obviously this is going to say no it's not. 4 is not greater than 5, and well, it is less than 10, but it's not greater than 5. In this case, both of these need to be true. If we change this to or, which is represented as 2 pipes, that's the character that's above your enter key. If you hold in shift and press that button, you'll get these pipes. So if we save that, we get yes it is, because it is less than 10. Okay, so let's go back to and let's put in 7. 7 comes back true, or yes, because it is greater than 5 and it's less than 10. And we can keep adding these if we want. Let's say and x is we'll say less than 8. I guess this is kind of pointless, but just to show you that you can keep adding on to this, so you can check as many things as you want. So we get yes it is. We can also use what's called an else if, and instead of just checking for something and saying if it is or it isn't, we can check multiple things. So let me just show you. It's a little easier than explaining it. So let's just get rid of these, And what we want to do is we want to say if something, then do this, else if something else, then do this, and then finally we can have an else that doesn't equate to either of these. All right, so let's just give a variable called color and let's set it to black. All right, so let's say if, sorry, can't type, if color is equal to red, let's just let's print out document.write, we'll say the color is red. Okay, now let's say else if color is blue, then we'll type out the color is blue. Now what this is doing is checking to see if color is red, and then it's going to print out the color is red. Then it's checking if the color is blue, and it'll print out the color is blue. This is saying if it's anything else except red or blue. Alright, so we can, let's just do document.write the color is not red or blue. Alright, so it's very simple logic. So if we save this, if we keep it on black, if we keep the color black, let's see what's going on here. Unexpected token. I'm sorry, I get mixed up because in some languages we can keep the else if together like this. In JavaScript, this needs to be separate. So save that. So we get the color is not red or blue. So if we change this to red, I'm sure you know what's going to happen. It tells us the color is red. Alright, so that's how you do an else if. Now you can keep tagging these on, these else ifs, as many as you want. So there's no limit to the comparisons you can have. So that's it for if statements. That's pretty much the gist of it. The next thing I want to talk about is switch statements, and which basically do the same thing. So let's get rid of all this. And what we're going to do, let's set a variable x equal to 4. Alright, so what we want to do is say switch, and then inside the parentheses we want to put whatever it is we're testing. In this case it's going to be x. And then we just want to open some parentheses, curly braces, just like an if statement. And we're going to use something called cases. So we're going to say if the case of x being 2, and then we want to put a colon, then we want to, let's document.write, and we'll write out excuse me, we'll just write out x is 2. Alright, so underneath that we need to put a break, because if that's true then we want to break out of this statement. Okay, so let's add another case before we test it out. So let's say case if x is 5, and we want to do the same thing, except we want to print out that it's 5. Alright, so if we save this, if x is equal to 4, it's not going to do anything. Let's change it to 2, and we get x is 2. Now let's change it back to 4. Now let's say we want a default behavior, just like the last else in an else if statement. We can use default. So let's document write x is not 2 or 5. So that'll be the default. So save that, and we get x is not 2 or 5. So you can see we can do the exact same thing with an if-else statement as we can with a switch. The last thing I want to do is actually paste in a switch. Nice snippets. So same type of thing. We're creating a variable called day, and that's equal to a date object. What we're doing here is instantiating a date object which comes in JavaScript in the core, I guess. And then we're getting the day property, which is just 0 through 6, which represents the days of the week. So we're saying switch, and then what we're testing is the day. Alright, so let's just echo this out. Well, we could just run this, I guess. So if the case is 0, then it's going to say it's Sunday. Okay. If the case is 1, Monday, and so on. So at the end of this, we're going to alert the value of X. So let's save this and reload, and we get today is Wednesday, which it is. So that's just another way to implement a switch statement. So that's pretty much it for conditionals. The next thing we'll be looking at is JavaScript events. Hey guys, so in this section I want to talk about JavaScript events and event handlers. And an event is basically just something that happens when an action has taken place in the browser. Here we have a list of events. We have abort, which isn't too popular. This occurs when the user cancels the loading of an image. Blur, which is usually used in form fields. It occurs when input focus is removed from a form element. So that's when, say you click in a form and then you click out of it. That's a blur. And on the opposite of that, we have focus, which is when you click in an input. Click is a very popular one. Obviously, that's when something is clicked. Change is when the value of a form field is changed by the user. Error, I'm not going to go through all of them, but we have mouse over and mouse out are also very popular. So if you hover over something and if you hover out of it, and we also have load and unload. So we can do something when the page loads or when the browser window loads. So to deal with events, we can use event handlers, which are basically just HTML attributes. So these are just some examples. We have on click, on mouse over, on focus, pretty much on and then the name of the event. So let's get into it and I will show you how they work. I'm going to create a new folder. This is chapter 2, section 5. Alright, and I'm just going to put this document right in there. And I'm going to create my HTML document. Open that up and just paste in some HTML. Now the first event that we'll look at is load, is when the page loads. Alright, and we can add the onload event handler right to the body. So we can say when the body loads, so onload equals, and in here we can add a function. Alright, so in the last section we learned about functions. So let's just let's run a function called say hi. And we actually want to return, so we'll return this function. Alright, so what we want to do is in the head tag, create our script tags, and we'll create this function. Function say hi, and we're going to alert. Now alert, I haven't really gone over alert and prompts, but an alert is when you get that pop-up. It's just pretty much just a browser pop-up, and different browsers do it in different ways. So I'll show you that now. So we just want to alert, and we'll just say hi. So what we're saying is when the body loads, on load, we want this function to run. So if we save this and reload, we get the JavaScript alert, which says hi. So that's events and event handling in its simplest form. Let's do something else to get rid of this. And let's see, let's use a click function. So we'll create a button with the value of, let's say, click me. I'm sorry, it's not value, I'm thinking of a submit button. Why is this not typing? Sorry guys. I'm using a virtual machine, so I keep clicking in and out of it. Alright, so we have a button that says click me. Obviously it's not going to do anything right now, but what we can do is add an event handler. We could say on click we want to return, we'll use the same function, say hi. So if we reload that and click, we get our alert. So that's how event handlers work. Let's just do a few more. Let's see. Let's create an H1, which is a heading. This is a heading. Alright, so we have this H1. This is a heading. Now let's add let's do a mouse over. So we'll say on mouse over. We'll have a function and we'll call that, let's see, return, we'll say change me. Alright, so when we hover over this H1, a function is going to run called change me. So I'm going to copy that, and up here I'm going to throw in this change me, and what we can do, we can actually grab, let's give this an ID. We'll say, we'll just give it an ID of heading. Now we can grab that with document.getElement by ID. Okay, and the ID we want to get is heading. So we have that. Let's actually put that in a variable. We say variable heading. Now when this change me runs, we're going to say heading dot. Now remember, a variable or anything really is an object, so we can call methods and properties on the object. So I'm going to call inner HTML, and what this does is it sets the HTML of that object. So whatever is between these H1 tags, we can actually change it using this syntax. So we'll change this, we'll say no kidding. So if I save this and reload and then we hover over, then it changes to no kidding. Now even if this is H1 tag is a block level element, which means it reaches across the entire browser. So even if I hover over it over here, it's going to change. Now we don't have a mouse an on mouse out event, so it's just going to stay at no kidding. So let's actually give it a on mouse out, and we'll give that a function of change me back. And I'm just going to copy this, and I'm sure you know where this is heading. We're just going to add on back, and we're going to change this back to this is a heading. So let's save that, and now if we reload, if we go in and mouse over, it changes to no kidding, and we go out, it changes back to this as a heading. So some really simple event handling, and let's see, what else do I want to do? Let's do a little bit with forms. So I'm going to get rid of all this, and let's just create a simple form, and we'll give this an input type of text, say name equals name. And we'll put a line break, and then we want a submit. So input type equals submit, value equals submit. Alright, so if we save that, so now we have this one field form with a field called name. So let's add a couple event handlers to this input tag. I'm going to say on focus, we're going to return a function called focus in. And I'm going to copy this and paste, and we're going to say on blur. Remember, on focus is when you click into the element, and on blur is when you click out. So we're going to call this function blur out. Alright, so let's create these real quick. Alright, so all we're going to do is alert, and we'll say I am in the field, copy that, and we'll say I am out of the field. Okay, so I'm going to save that and reload, and if we click inside, we get an alert saying I'm in the field, and if we click out, we get an alert that says I am out of the field. So this gives you an idea of how we can use form validation with JavaScript. Obviously this has nothing to do with validation, showing this alert, but we could say if this input field is blank, then show an alert saying please fill in the required fields, or something like that. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in the project in this section. So we'll be getting more into event handling then. Hey guys, in this section we're going to talk about jQuery and how to implement it, how to manipulate certain elements in the DOM. We'll talk about events and a couple other things. So the first thing we need to do is go to jQuery.com, and we want to download jQuery. Alright, well first let me create a folder for us to work in. So this is chapter 2, section 6. Alright, so I'm going to just click on the giant download jQuery button, and we can download either jQuery 1 or 2. I've been sticking with 1, so I'm going to download we can download the compressed version or the uncompressed version for development. Basically what this means is compressed is the code's all squished together, there's no comments, it's basically unreadable, while the uncompressed version is well commented and you can actually kind of read it a little. We don't need to read it, so we're just going to get the compressed version, which is this, which just looks like a bunch of gibberish. But we're going to copy all this, and in our folder I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it jQuery.js, and open that up and just paste in all that code and save it, and then we can close that and we never have to look at it again. So now what we want to do is create our HTML file. Alright, so let's open that up, and I'm going to open it with Notepad, paste in some HTML. So now what we need to do is we need to include our jQuery file. So we can do that in the head if we open up a script tag, and let's say type is text / JavaScript, and source is going to point to our file, which is jQuery.js, and it's in the same folder, so we don't have to specify any type of folder or anything like that. Alright, so now jQuery is included so we can use it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a heading, an H1 heading, and under that I'm going to open up some script tags. And when you're using jQuery, it is JavaScript, so it has to be in script tags unless it's in an external file. Now, to grab an object from the DOM, we need to use the jQuery object, which is a $sign followed by some parentheses. And in here is where we want to put whatever it is we want to grab or select. In this case, it's H1. Now, this is going to grab all the H1 tags in the document because we haven't specified a class or an ID. In this case, it's okay. Now, once we have that object, we can manipulate it and do a lot of different things. We can add events, effects. One of the methods that we can use that's pretty simple that I can show you is the add class method. Alright, so as you can imagine, all that does is adds a class. So I'm gonna add a class called red. Alright, and I'm gonna actually put some style tags up here. And we're going to give it a class called red, and that is going to we're going to say color red. So it's just going to turn whatever text it is red. So if we save that and we reload, I'm sorry, I don't think that's the right file. Not sure what's going on here. Style. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to have a closing script tag here. I always forget to do that. Alright, so now if I reload, this heading has a style. If we look at it through the developer tools, we can see H1 class red. Now that's not here. We're not doing that. We're not assigning that class through HTML. We're doing it through jQuery. So that's how you select an object. Now, it isn't really optimal to have your jQuery and your script tags right in the body of your document. So if we take these, if we cut this out and we put it up here, and you always want to make sure that you're including jQuery first before you use any jQuery. So we'll paste that here in the head. Now if I save this and reload, you can see that it's lost its class, so the jQuery is not being used or called. And the reason that is because we're calling it before we actually load the H1. Now if you've dealt with if you're a web developer and you've seen jQuery in the head, then you've probably seen the document ready syntax. So what we need to do is say jQuery document dot ready. Alright, so in the ready method we want to say function. So we're just opening up a self-calling function here. It doesn't have a name, it's just gonna run. We want to end that with a semicolon. Now this is where we want to put in all of our jQuery, right in between the parentheses. So if we save that and we reload, now it's back. We have the class is now equal to red. So just remember this syntax. If possible, make it a snippet in your editor just so you can just paste it right in, because if you don't have this and you have your script tags before what you're actually taking and manipulating, and it's not going to work. So let's do something else besides add a class. Let's take this h1 and let's change the content with the .html method. So now let's say this heading is from JQuery. So if we save that, reload, this heading is from JQuery. So the .html method or action, whatever you want to call it, it works like inner HTML in JavaScript, which we've used in the past sections. It just changes the content in those tags. Now if I create another h1, we'll say here's another heading, and save that, and we reload, we also get this heading is from jQuery, because here we are grabbing all of the h1 tags in the document. Now if we want to single out one of these, we can add, let's say, add a class of my class. So if we want to only change this one, we can go back to this selector or this element and just say dot my class. So now it's only going to grab the h1 tag with my class. So if we save that and reload, you can see that the one without the class is back to its original text. So let's look at some events. If we go to our browser, let's just go to jQuery.com. I'm just going to type in jQuery events. I'm not sure the exact URL. api.jQuery.com/category/events. And there's just loads of events. We have a lot of the events that we've seen with standard JavaScript. We have blur, click, change, and then we have double click, different kinds of position type of events, the mouse position relative to the left edge to the top edge. Let's see, we have our focus and blur, we've seen those, focus in, focus out, hover, just loads of events that we can use for different kinds of animations and manipulations. So let's use something simple. Let's just use the click event. And if we click on click, we can see it gives us the syntax, it gives us the definition, and also shows us some examples. So all we need is the selector or whatever we're targeting, and do .click, and then inside that we want to open up a function, a self-calling function, and then in that function is what we want to do when it's clicked. So what I'm going to do here is just clear everything out. I'm going to leave the document.ready, and what I want to do is create a button, and the button will say change text. And then below that, I'm going to create an h1 that says this is the text to change. Okay, so if we save that and take a look, we just have a button and then we have some text in h1. So what I want to do is make it so that when we click this, we can actually change this text. So what we need to do is we want to grab the button using the jQuery object. So we'll say button, and remember, this is going to grab all the buttons on the page because we didn't specify a class or an ID. So we'll say button.click, and then in these parentheses we want to start a function. Alright, so when this button is clicked, what do we want to do? We want to take the h1 and we want to change the content, and we can do that with .html like we just did. and then in that HTML, we can say, here is some new text. Alright, so very simple, couple lines of code. Save that and reload, and if we click this, it changes. Here is some new text. Now we can also use effects. So if we go to, I'm just going to type in jQuery effects. So here are just a bunch of different animations and effects that we can use. Fade in, fade out, how we can hide and show, slide up and slide down. Let's use that. So we have this, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to change what happens when we click the button. Instead of changing the text, let's do slide up, and that takes a parameter of the speed. You can use keywords like slow, fast, or you can use numbers, and I believe it's milliseconds or something like that. I'm not really sure. 200 is a good speed though. So if we save that and we go and reload and we click the button, it slides up. Now it doesn't slide back down because we haven't specified that. If we want to do that, we can use slide toggle. So if we change this here to slide toggle, let's reload, and we can have it go up and down. So you can see this is the building block for those great sliders and slideshows and tabs that you see on different websites. And we can also do what's called chaining. We can just keep chaining different things. So let's say .html, I'll change this again, we'll say change text. So we're just chaining on here. We're taking the h1 tag, we're changing the HTML, and then we're toggling the slide. So let's save that, and you can see it changed and it's slide toggling. So there's just a lot of different things. I'd really suggest that you go to api.jquery.com and just check out all the different effects and events and manipulation. It's really helpful. There's a lot of great documentation. So that's it for now, and in the next section we're going to do our project, which will include pretty much everything we've gone through in this chapter. We'll include JavaScript for form validation, and we'll also use some jQuery effects. So I will see you in that section. Hey guys, in this section we're going to create a project that implements all or most of the JavaScript knowledge that we've gained up to this point. So what I want to do is show you the finished product, and it uses JavaScript as well as jQuery. What it is, it's just a form, but it has these tabs that separates the form into sections. Now this is all these fields are part of the same form. We just have these tabs. So that's the jQuery, and we're going to use JavaScript to validate required fields, as well as validating the format of the email address. So you can see if we click submit form, it's telling us to fill in the required fields. So this is the project that we'll be doing in this section. So we're going to start out by creating our document structure. So I'm going to create a new folder, and this is chapter 2, section 8. And in this folder I want to create my index file. I want to create a CSS folder and a JavaScript folder. So let's open up the index. Of course, it's just a blank page. I'm going to open it in Notepad as well. Now I have some snippets that I'll be pasting in some code, and then I'll be typing some code. So I'm going to paste in the document the HTML structure. Now I need to include jQuery. We're not going to use a CDN link. We're going to actually download jQuery and use it in our structure. So I'm going to go to jQuery.com, download, and we're going to use the latest jQuery 1, which is 1.10.2. So I'm going to copy all of this and go back to my folders, and in the JS folder I'm going to create a new document, and we're going to call that jQuery.js, and then we can go ahead and paste in all that code and save and close that out. Alright, so now we have the jQuery file in our structure, so we need to include it. So I'm going to some script tags. I'm going to say script src, and that's going to point to the JS folder and the jQuery file, and that's going to be type equals text JavaScript, and that's it. So we want to put on a closing tag. So now we have jQuery included, so we can use it. I guess the next thing to do would be to set up the HTML of the form. So inside, oh, I don't even have a closing body tag or an HTML tag. Now, to save time and the fact that we've already went over HTML, I'm actually just going to paste in the form from my snippets file. So I'm going to open that up. Alright, so we have the form, and I'll just explain it. Alright, so what we have is a form that has an event handler on submit. So when it's submitted, it's going to call the validate form function that we're going to create in our JavaScript file. So that's going to validate the form. And we have an unordered list, and we have title field pairs. So we have a list with the class of title, a list item with the class of title that'll have the caption on the tab. And then we'll have another list item with the class of fields that'll contain all the fields for that particular tab or title. So we have first name, middle, last name, and email for the Who Are You tab. And you'll notice we have an asterisk on the first name and the email because those are going to be required fields. And these also have a class of REQ. So all we have to do to make a field required is give it this class, and our JavaScript file will know what to do with that. Alright, so next we have Who Are You, which is, Where Are You, which is location information. And we have 3 fields, and the state field is required. And finally we have the What Do You Do tab, which is just occupation, company location, and we can see that occupation is required. It has the asterisk, and it has the class of REQ. So that's the form. So I'm going to save that and reload, and we have a very ugly looking form, but we're going to fix it up. So let's include our CSS file. So we'll say link rel is style sheet, and that's going to be in the CSS folder, and we're going to name it style.css. Okay, so let's do that now. Create a new file. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and open that, And I'm just going to paste the style in because we've already gone over CSS, and I'll talk about it real quick. Alright, so we have our body, which is going to be 500 pixels wide, and it's set to margin auto because we want it in the middle. Text align is going to be all centered, the tabs and the form fields. And then the list items will have no bullets. The list with the class of fields will have no margin and have a padding of 1 on the top and bottom and 0 on the left and right. And then the list items with the class of title, we're going to change it to a pointer, the cursor to a pointer, so that when we hover over the title or the tab, we have a pointer. We're going to make the font weight bold. We're going to increase the font size, line height. The background will be light gray, and we're going to have a border on the bottom and the top. The top will have a white border, just to show that little bit of separation in each tab, and then we'll have a bottom border which will be gray. And we have a class of hide that will hide whatever is given that class, so that's set to display none. So let's save that and take a look. So we have our titles and our fields. Obviously there's no animation yet, we haven't added any jQuery. We're going to do that now. So if we go to index.html, we're going to have a new JavaScript file. I'm going to copy this link to the jQuery JavaScript file, and this is going to be called animation because this is going to take care of the tab slide up and down animation. So if I save that, go back to our structure and create that file. Alright, so let's open that up. Alright, so we went over how to prepare for jQuery. We have the document.ready, and then we create a function. So we're going to do that. Let's say jQuery document.ready. And inside here, we're going to open up a function. Alright, so now we can put all our jQuery right here. So what I want to do first is I want these closed when we visit the page. I want these hidden except for the first tab. We want the first tab to be open. So we've done something similar to this in a past section. So what we're going to do is say jQuery, and we're going to grab all the list items with the class of fields. Alright, and we're going to filter. We've used this before. So we want to filter, and we're going to use a pseudo class. We're going to use the nth child, and I'm going to say n plus 4, and I explained this in the previous section. And then what we want to do is add a class. So this is all stuff we've done. We're going to add the class of hide, which in our CSS file just sets the display to none, so that should hide all those fields. So if we save that and reload, we now have our first tab open and our next two closed. So we don't have anything happening here yet. We need to create a click event. So now we want to say jQuery, and we're going to say UL. So the unordered list. Okay, so we're not going to use .click. We're going to use .on, which is what jQuery really uses when we use .click. And all we have to do is say .on and then click. Now we could put in mouse down, mouse up, any kind of event we can put in here. So we're going to say on click. Now we need to put here what we're specifying that we want to click on, and that's going to be the title. So it's going to be any list item with the class of title, and then the last parameter is going to be a function, and this is what we want to happen when a list item with the class of title is clicked on. So whenever we click on any of these, and what we want to do is we're going to say this, because we're talking about the element that we're dealing with, which is the li.title, and we're going to do a little bit of chaining here. We're going to say next. Now what we mean by next is the next element. So the li.title, which is the tab, the next element would be the li.fields, and that's what we want to slide down. So we're going to say next dot slide down, and this slide down effect, we can give it a speed. We can say fast, slow. We've actually did this in the past section, and we're going to use 200, which is a good speed. And then we're going to say dot siblings, which will be the li.fields. So all the other li.fields are going to slide up. So slide up, and we'll give that a speed of 200 as well. Okay, so pretty simple, just a few lines of code. Let's save that and reload, and nothing's happening. So let's take a look at the console. Alright, so object has no method slide down. Oh, I forgot to capitalize the D. It's case sensitive, so let's reload that, and now it's working fine. We have no errors in the console. Alright, so that's the animation part of it. The next thing we need to do is our form validation. If we submit now, of course it doesn't do anything. We're not using any kind of server-side language. It's not going to do anything anyway except validate. It's not going to actually submit to a server-side file or anything like that. So that's it for the animation. So I want to copy this, and we're going to include the validation file. And we'll create that. Whoop. Don't want a folder, we want a file. So let's open that up. So what we have in our HTML is when we submit the form, we're calling an event handler that's going to the validate form function. So that's what we need to create. And we've studied functions already, so we'll say function validate form. And let's see, what we want to do first is we want to find all of the fields that have the class of REQ, because we want to check the required fields first. So we do that with a loop, and we're going to use a for loop, nothing we haven't seen before. And we're going to set a variable of I to 0, and we're going to say as long as I is less than my form dot elements dot length, and then we're going to simply increment that. Now each time this goes around, we first want to check for any elements that have the class of REQ. So we got to say if my form dot elements I, so we're going to go through each element, dot class name is equal to REQ, and my form dot elements I dot value dot length is equal to 0. Let's see. So what we're saying in this statement here, I'm sorry, I have to, we don't have the curly braces. So what we're saying is we're iterating through each field in the form, and we're saying if that field in the current iteration has a class name of REQ and that field has a length, the value has a length of 0. So that means if there's nothing typed in the field. So it has to have the class name and it has to have a length of 0 in order for this to run. And what we're going to do here is simply alert a message. So we're going to say alert please fill in all required fields. And we don't want the form to be submitted. So what we want to do is return false. And that'll stop it from actually being submitted. So the user will just get an alert. So that's all we have to do for the required fields. So let's save that. Let's reload, and if we submit, we get please fill in all required fields. If I fill in one field, it's still going to do it. So we have to go through and make sure all required fields. And of course it's not submitting anywhere, but it was returning true and there was no alert message. So that's pretty simple form validation. You can get more intricate. You could highlight the fields that are missing, but in this case we have these tabs, so that's really kind of pointless because they'd have to go through each tab anyway. So that's just really simple required validation. The next thing we want to do is make sure that this email field has an actual email address and not just anything. So we're going to stay in this function, this validate form function, and we want to make sure we're out of the for loop, and we want to create a variable called email, and we're going to grab the email field by its ID, which is email. So we do that with the document.getElementById function, and the ID we're looking for is email, and we want the value, so we're going to say dot value. So it's not only pointing to the field, it's pointing to whatever is typed in that field. And the next thing we want to do is let's create a new variable called @POS for @position, and we want to say email, so that's this variable pointing to the value of the email field. We're going to say dot index of, and we want an @ sign. Okay, so what that's doing is checking to make sure that there is an @ sign inside the value. Let's create another variable called dot position, and that's going to be email dot last index of. So this is going to make sure that the dot is coming after the @ sign. So let's see, it's dot. Alright, so now what we want to say is we want to create an if statement, and we want to say if @pos is less than 1, or .pos is less than @pos plus 2, or dot parse +2 is greater than or equal to x dot length. So this is a very simple way of doing it. You could also use regular expressions, and there's a couple different methods, but this is just a real simple one. So if it's not a valid email address, we just want to send an alert, just like we did with the required fields. And then we want to return false, so we don't want the form to be sent if the email address isn't valid. So let's save that and reload this, and of course if we don't have the required fields, we're going to get this message. So let's fill in all the required fields, but I'm not going to have a valid email address. So if we submit that, we need to type a valid email address. So if we go to the email, and this could be anything, and then the @ sign, and then something dot something. Okay, so now it submits. So that's it for our form. We've used jQuery to do the animations and JavaScript to do the validations. So that's it for this chapter. In the next chapter, we'll be looking at XML, JSON, and AJAX.